if protein intake gets high enough, arguments about things like carbohydrates versus fat, at least in terms of body composition, become actually relatively minor points. Again, particularly if you're eating clean whole foods for those. And the reason I say this is because when we look at, again, all the protein overfeeding studies, right? What do we see over and over and over? As protein intakes get excessively high, body composition tends to improve, okay? Body composition tends to improve. All right, and that's almost irrespective of if you're trying to be in a surplus, a deficit. In fact, the data tends to show that if you try to force feed enough protein, it's almost impossible to get into a calorie deficit to begin with. People start losing weight, particularly obviously if they lift and train. Okay, so when I make these statements, it is in the context and the assuming you're actually putting in time in the gym. Because if you're not putting gym time in, let's be realistic, you're not taking body composition or fat loss particularly seriously anyways. And I mean up to your own physical limitations. Obviously, people do have medical limitations. Not everybody is healthy. I accept that fact when I make that statement. But to say you can't do anything? Well, then losing a little body fat is probably the least of your concerns at that point. So again, largely irrelevant. Probably training everything. I'm assuming you're training your arms, your legs, everything. You're training your whole body to some extent. Okay, this is what we're talking about. Okay? Protein is going to be king. Can we make arguments back and forth about if protein is not ultra high? Is there cases where maybe keeping that carbohydrate higher is possibly better for, say, accumulating less body fat? Sure. Absolutely. It's a case to be made for that. Is there a case to be made for, well, if you do go fats, then focusing on omega-3 fats, polyunsaturated fats over specific saturated fats, probably better? Yep. Definitely make a case for that. All right. I want to be clear. We can make a case for all of these things. And they're not untrue. But here is the big game changer. If you load protein high enough, this all starts to become less important. It becomes lesser variables. Okay? Up to the point to where you've had someone bring it up, but you said ultra high carbs have these insulin responses. Yeah, that's true. And they can fuel your training. Yeah, that's true. Guess what? So can protein. But the difference with the protein, better muscle sparing, higher thermic effect. You can eat more food. You're going to be fuller, but with less gastrointestinal distress. Again, the point here being, all those things that we're getting from carbohydrate, we can still get from protein. And what I'm suggesting is, if we want to be optimal, and I don't recommend this that often. I've historically, for the last couple of years, I've shied away from giving that sort of advice. And here's why. It wasn't practical. We have had an enormous, basically the worst economy I've ever seen in my life. People don't have money. People can barely afford coaching. They can't afford food. So when I'm over here talking about, eat 300-400 grams of protein a day. To the general audience out here, they can't afford it. With the cost of food, with the cost of living, with the economy for a while, this isn't practical advice for most people. And it still may not be. But is it optimal advice? I'm going to go out on a limb and say, for those of you chasing a better physique, there comes a threshold where when protein intake starts to reach a certain threshold, even caring if you're bulking or cutting anymore, this whole concept starts going out the window. You just start recompositioning no matter what. It's just a question of, if you're wanting to get leaner faster, you probably fast more. All right? More fasting time. And if you're not trying to, then you might want to eat for, the time you get up till you go to bed. But the idea is the same. When protein intakes start getting excessively high, we start losing body fat, even when we try to force a calorie surplus. All right? When protein intakes get excessively high, we gain a little bit of muscle, even in a calorie deficit. You see where I'm going here? It starts blurring the lines. And this is something that I recall years ago. I laughed at Athlete X over this because he didn't give the best lifting advice. He gave good physical therapy advice. It's his wheelhouse. He used to say this, but it's like, and he stayed shredded year round. And he would say stuff like, well, instead of eating other food, just have protein shakes all the time. Anytime you're hungry, eat a protein shake. Protein, protein, protein. He goes, and then it won't matter. You'll gain muscle no matter what, and it won't matter. And I laughed at that nonsense advice. I'm like, oh, you're going to bulk and cut. And I clowned to some extent, scoffed that advice off. Also because he wasn't very big and he wasn't very strong. But he did stay really shredded, and he was in good shape and had definitely more muscle than the average guy. Now, in retrospect, as I've gotten older, of course, he was a little older than me at the time. As I've gotten older and gained more experience and delved more and more into the deeper nutrition research, observed more stuff as a coach and as an athlete, I've come to realize there's a degree of truth to that. There's a degree of truth to, look, you can start not worrying about these paradigms unless you have a certain body weight you want to hit and all of that. If you just keep protein loading, it really is the biggest thing we can do nutritionally for this. Now, I am not advocating people eat junk food. I'm not advocating not eating vegetables and fruit and whole foods. I am not saying that. I want to be very, very clear. I'm actually kind of anti-junk food, for those who haven't figured that out. I don't think you should be eating refined fats, refined sugars, stuff like that. I don't think it's a good idea. I think we all need fiber in our diets, okay? I'm super big on omega-3 fats. So, your context here though, protein. If you consume enough protein, a lot of these other arguments start to just become less important for the pursuit of improved body composition, meaning gaining muscle and losing fat, both over time, okay? They just become lesser arguments. And definitely, well, am I filling them with carbs versus fat? Well, at a certain point, it becomes less important. And I could say you can have preferences that are going to depend upon your individual needs, your individual tolerances, and that has to be accounted for. But really the protein, and we know that when protein starts being matched, they become less important in the grand scheme of things, particularly as it goes up. This is what we see in the literature. Okay? All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.